Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much to be sacrificing your sunny lunchtime with us today. To give you a bit of context, I'm one of the two co-founders of Theodo. So we're a tech consultancy, and the idea of this talk is to share with you the ideas that we've learned along the journey from growing from 10 people to 700 people. And trying as much as possible to retain an agile culture along the way. And I think one way to start is to give a bit of context about the agile movement, where it came from, and then dig a bit into what does agile mean for people, why is it hard, and then look at, as we did at some point in our journey, what do the large organizations that actually maintain an agile culture have in common? What are the principles they share? And an introduction to the Lean Tech Manifesto, which is the way we structured these principles that we have identified. And so, just to really quick context about the agile movement, one needs to remember that when computer science started, it really started as a science, and so you had these very little teams of scientists without much methodology actually being able to build the guiding system for Apollo 11 and put a rocket on the moon. But from the 1980s, with the invention of the microchip, computers became much more ubiquitous. Every company bought a computer, and so the need for software became huge. And this booming industry also attracted more and more bureaucratic methodologies. And these bureaucratic approaches didn't get famous for putting other rockets on the moon, but more for their spectacular failures. Because all of a sudden you had these gigantic, monstrous projects with a high level of complexity, and many of them failing. And of course, the failures were spectacular. One failure that we mentioned in the book is the benefit payments card failure in the UK, which cost the British taxpayer £800 million. But you can find such failures in every country. I found a very nice one in the US. France also has a beautiful one, 290 million euros down the drain, trying to rewrite software for civil service payments, salaries. And that of course started frustrating a lot of people and some visionaries trying to find structure methodologies that would, bring us back to the early days of creating value very fast. Realized that they were all looking for similar things, and so there was this key moment in February 2001 where they met in Utah and talked about trying to find the values they shared, and the outcome was the Agile Manifesto. This incredible document with 4 principles that capture, I think, so well the essence of what they meant and what we understand as Agile nowadays. And we can see in these 4 principles the huge rejection of the bureaucratic processes, because the first principle is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And if you look at them, almost all these principles are really some kind of counterpoint to what bureaucracy can look like. So what the Agile Manifesto did so well is really launch a huge movement. And I was looking for a number and I found this one quite telling. In 2017, Deloitte surveyed 10,000 leaders in HR and business, and 94% said that agility and collaboration was critical to their organization's success. So the Agile Manifesto really contributed to this huge adoption of the Agile concepts. Something else that definitely contributed to is the success of some of the digital companies that completely disrupted their industries. And 2 iconic examples being Netflix leading to Blockbuster's bankruptcy, or Amazon completely taking over Walmart in a matter of 2 decades. And and of course, trying to understand what they had done so well, one thing that stood out was that they were agile. So that's the context behind the Agile movement. So what is Agile? So I think the Agile Manifesto managed to capture two key visions of what people understand now when they mean Agile. One is a humanist vision of teams with a lot of autonomy, empowered on creating value. And the other vision is a more business vision of innovating more rapidly than the competitors to outperform the market. And of course, when you think of that, these two visions, who wouldn't want to have an organization with more autonomy and that innovates more rapidly? Which, I mean, funny enough, apparently 6% of HR and business leaders don't want that. But let's forget about them. That explains why 94%, of course, of leaders would like to be more agile. But it also kind of explains why it's so hard. In the same survey, only 6% of the leaders said that they were actually highly agile, so had achieved that objective. And that's something that I think we've all experienced. We experienced it also at Theodo, where in some contexts, we were able to deliver value in production with high user adoption in a matter of weeks. And that could happen also in large corporates. So these two examples date back from really the 2012, 2013, are done for Safran is now this huge aerospace company in France, and BNP is also a huge bank. And it was really a matter of weeks before the users were able to use the products we had built. But in the different contexts, and I'm not talking about the different company context, but really a different, complexity context actually, more stakeholders, more dependencies, more security requirements, then all our expertise in Agile didn't solve the problem. And one thing we tried to build as a Agile took 18 months to actually be fully in production. And it's quite an interesting anecdote because the prototype we built was built in 3 weeks, and we were able to deliver with bypassing all the compliance for a very short limited time. And so then they said, okay, fine, now that you've proven you can do it in 3 weeks, try to do it again, but without all the bypassing authorizations. And that's when it took 18 months. And I can talk about it a bit later, because these 18 months were really not wasted. We did 18 months of continuous improvement for great outcomes. But anyway, this is to illustrate the fact that Agile in a complex environment is very difficult. So we're not the only ones to have faced that issue. And a lot of people have tried to find solutions. I think the most popular is Safe today, with 20,000. They claim they have 20,000 companies using Safe. Unfortunately, Safe did not convince any of the authors of the Agile Manifesto. Some beautiful quotes that I found online, between Ken Schwaber saying that Safe is unsafe and Martin Fowler saying that Safe is shitty Agile. It's quite telling that it's not convinced any of the Agile leaders. And I think the issue is that Safe doesn't address the two visions that I presented. One is the autonomy. My experience in Safe environments is that the tech team, the engineers, don't have any autonomy on the business side of things. And it also doesn't deliver the kind of speed that you could see at an Amazon or these kind of organizations, because most organizations that do Safe actually are on a 3-month cycle, which is often better than what they had before. Don't get me wrong. And so what was interesting for looking back at our experience was trying to understand why it was so difficult to crack that problem. And one thing we've realized, discussing this with a lot of experts, is that the Agile Manifesto actually has kind of a design problem, because it's really not been designed for large organizations where everybody wants to adopt Agile now. It was designed at the time for a small software development team, and actually the principles don't really make sense if you apply them in a large organization. And to demonstrate that, because I think it's an interesting kind of insight to have, I'm going to go through each of them and try and do the thought experiment of applying them to large organizations. So the first one, individuals and interactions. So the idea that you can you create a lot of value when you rely on the interactions between the individuals within a team. What has a kind of fundamental issue, which is that when the number of individuals grow, the number of possible connections grows to the square. And so really quickly in a large organization, you can have hundreds, thousands, or even, you know, at the scale of Amazon, hundreds of billions of possible connections. And therefore, it doesn't really make sense as a guiding principle for the leadership team. Working software over comprehensive documentations. So similarly, this is a really powerful idea, this idea that, you know, if you do small iterations on your software, you're gonna address and tackle the challenges of quality, which is, you know, very true at small and even medium size. But one of the problems of software, so this is me trying to illustrate what software is about. So it's very simplistic, but let's say it's a lot about branches. So, you know, it's code saying, you know, if this, then do that. Then, you know, you have one branch, two possible paths. Ensuring the quality is good is as simple as testing these two paths. But as soon as you add branches, you realize that the number of possible paths grows exponentially to the power of 2. And so you end up in the kind of situations where every increment, as small as you want it to be, is going to add to all these possible paths. And so you're actually adding a lot more complexity even with small increments. And so finding a bug in such a large, complex system is not as easy as just trying to make small iterations. I've actually hidden a bug. I guess you can see it. I don't know if you see it. Anyway, this is just to show how difficult it is to find a bug in one possible pass. Third principle, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And that's really the very powerful idea that if you put the customer at the heart of the team, magic happens. We really love that at Theodo, this idea that not only do you go faster because you've got all the, you know, all the right parties in the same team, but on top of that, you also create magic because by confronting the business constraints with the technical constraints allows you to find the more ingenious solutions that kind of like solve both at the same time. But of course, as soon as the project becomes bigger, you can't really put the customer in every team. And also on the other side, usually once the customer organization becomes bigger, it's not just one person, but multiple stakeholders, and you have to manage the needs and the requirements of each of these stakeholders. So again, customer collaboration doesn't really mean anything once you're like, you know, at the size of projects where there's hundreds of people. Finally, responding to change over following a plan. Well, this idea that, you know, the small team on the ground understands what is happening in the market and is, of course, the best suited to adapt to these changes. The problem is if you let teams on the ground impact change to a whole organization, what you actually are doing is more crowd effects. And as we know, crowd effects can have catastrophic consequences. So that's not exactly something you want to implement at large scale. So this is basically demonstrating that the Agile Manifesto, which offers such amazing, I think, principles as to guide a team, do not, you know, these principles are less useful or almost like useless in large organizations. Does that mean that agile scale is not possible? Well, as I said, and what gave us hope when we were like going through the same kind of questioning, and this is probably like 10 years ago, was that we could see that some of these organizations that were around us were incredibly rapid, seemed to have very strong teams with a very strong autonomy. And so we kind of believed, you know, Apple, Amazon, and Linux are great examples. We do mention them in the book. We would think, okay, so agile at scale is possible. So what do they have in common? And by studying these guys, these companies, we found two very interesting things. One is we actually found lean thinking and a very like direct connection to lean thinking, which was kind of unexpected, to be honest. So I don't know if you're aware of that, but you can find this interview on YouTube of Steve Jobs in 1990, where he explains that he's been coached by Dr. Jurin. And so for those who don't know who Dr. Jurin is, that probably deserves 2 minutes explanation. So we're talking the time when Steve Jobs has just been fired from Apple, and so he's launched his new company Next, and he's fascinated by quality. So it's always been an important thing, excellence, quality for him. And he's very interested in how to actually make it more systemic. And he's very excited about all these new things that we're hearing about Japan. And so he gets Dr. Jurin to coach him. And Dr. Jurin is one of the 2 famous people that were sent, 2 professors that were sent to Japan after World War II by the US to help Japanese reconstruction, and who seemed to not have a great audience in the US, where the economy was booming, so nobody cared about new management theories. But of course, in Japan, people were much probably a bit more listening, and they both spoke and spoke at conferences. Some of them where the leadership of Toyota was there. Some of them where you had the future founders of Sony. So a lot of like the top execs of Japan were there. And then they stayed also a long time in Japan. So basically brought the seed of scientific management to these Japanese companies, but also learned from these Japanese companies all the amazing things they've been doing for decades. And so clearly Jurin was a great lean expert before the word lean actually was used. And you can see in this interview how much Steve Jobs understood deeply some of the lean principles. I'm adding this quote where he says that, if you want to improve the processes, you should give the opportunity for the people on the ground to really change and improve them, and trust their intelligence to do it. Another leading Silicon Valley entrepreneur, I mean, he's whatever, West Coast entrepreneur, is Jeff Bezos. It's documented that he actually studied the Toyota Way in 2000. And you can see some traces of that in his letter to shareholders, which he wrote, one of them where he speaks about his Kaizen coaching and being challenged about what the root cause is, and feeling like he's in the Karate Kid movie. And that lean culture at Amazon was really accelerated when he hired Marco Neto, who's a lean expert, as the SVP Worldwide Operations and Customer Service. So that's why you will see there's a lot of lean culture at Amazon, both from Jeff Bezos and from Marco Neto. So that was one thing that was quite interesting, because we also been exposed to lean thinking, and it made sense that lean thinking was bringing this very rich framework that shares the objectives of Agile, but has actually been battle tested for large organizations. And then the second thing we discovered is actually was quite a new discovery also, was the role that technology had played in many of these organizations in distributing the work across a network of teams, and merging that work back together quite seamlessly. And so basically enabling teams to stay empowered while contributing to a large organization. And 2 quite iconic examples, Linux. So really, when you look at the 2 scaling crises of Linux, and Linux, in case you don't know, maybe that deserves 3 seconds, but Linux is this amazing open source operating system used by all the web servers, the top 500 supercomputers, and also all Android phones. So basically used by 4 or 5 billion people every day, I think. And Linux is an open source project, so it's mostly voluntary contributors. So if it was a very heavy bureaucracy, Linux would die instantly, because people wouldn't want to bother with working for free for bureaucracy. But it also scaled, and there's about 20,000 cumulated contributors now to Linux. And so there were 2 quite key crises in that journey. And the first one was addressed by making the architecture more modular, and also making it official that every module had some kind of owner called the maintainer. And the second crisis was actually solved with even more kind of tech answer, which was initially the adoption of BitKeeper, which allowed distributed version control. And for the anecdote, when the founder of BitKeeper threatened to make it not free for Linux, Linus, the founder of Linux, Linus decided to take a few weeks off and wrote a competitor, a free competitor called Git, which is now used, I think, by 98% of developers worldwide. And exactly for that reason, because it's been this amazing technology enabling distributed collaboration on software, and not just on software. I've since then discovered these amazing examples of teams collaborating in a distributed way on stuff that has nothing to do with software using GitHub, Git and GitHub. And yeah, so that's one really, like, I think, amazing illustration. The other one, a slightly more famous probably, is Amazon. Amazon, like most tech organization, probably all tech organization at some point reached a level where it was this gigantic monolith, and contributing to it took ages and a lot of synchronization. And if you wanted to change the database, you had to wait for the monthly database meeting where people would decide which columns were allowed to change. And there was also like a quarterly meeting where people would look at all the transverse projects, decide which ones would be done, which ones wouldn't be done. And of course, by that time, almost every project was a transverse project because of all the dependencies between all the teams. And that was like a horrible period for Amazon in the tech teams, because you would apply for the project that was really strategic to you, and you would wait for the quarterly meeting, and at the end of the quarterly meeting, the answer could be, sorry, we decide your project is not useful enough, so it's going to be postponed. However, we found somebody else's project is very useful, so you should contribute to them, despite it not having any impact on your business objectives. So a lot of people were quitting at the time, and I think the amazing genius of Jeff Bezos at the time was to realize that what was needed was not better communication between the teams, but actually eliminating communication, and do that using technology, which in their case was to really re-architecture Amazon to a more service-oriented architecture, and ensuring that the APIs between the different services, so one team per service, and the APIs between these teams, to be high enough quality, well enough design that people could use them in the self-service mode. No need to to like plan meetings with the other team to understand what they meant with the APIs. Anyway, so these are really the two. I mean, if we were to summarize all our learnings from 10 years of growing Theodo and like studying tech giants and practicing lean thinking on a daily basis, it would be that large organizations that have managed to keep an agile culture seem to all share a strong lean thinking culture, and also use technology to distribute work. And that's what we captured in the Lean Tech Manifesto. And so we decided to try to capture our learnings in a very easy way, and build on the genius of the Agile Manifesto. And so what are our learnings? First, and this is back to the title of today's meeting. Well, once you look at how these organizations have scale, one key thing is to start with the customer, start with value. And so reorder the Agile Manifesto. Clearly, the authors of the Agile Manifesto, their priority at the time was to fight against processes. But I think, it's probably not the most scalable strategy. So first, start with customer collaboration. And then basically we looked for the kind of principles that were really in line with each of these 4 principles, but made sense at large scale. And we came up with 4 principles, which are value for the customer, tech-enabled network of teams, right first time and just in time, and building a learning organization. And I'll take 5-10 minutes to introduce that. So yeah, first idea, customer collaboration doesn't scale. But what can scale is actually to define value for the customer as the North Star of the organization. So really align the whole organization on value, which allows us to agree on the shared goal as an organization, and constantly strive to better understand how it can be done, and understand also how we contribute individually or as teams to that value. And that, I think, is like clearly the number one principle. It's also the first principle of the book Lean Thinking, and that I think is like probably like the most important thing to keep to maintain an agile culture at large scale. 3 examples at Theodo. So we go on the Gemba a lot as leaders to understand the value, confront our theory to the reality. So Gemba is this Japanese word for shop floor, where things happen. So one tool that we've created and that we use a lot is what we call product architecture. So a way to visualize the different constraints between the needs of the different stakeholders, the different functionalities that we plan to build, and the different technologies that we plan to use to deliver them. And that allows us to really visualize trade-offs and basically, of course, empower the team working on that product to visualize, to see these trade-offs themselves and choose the best kind of options among these. Third thing is heavily leverage visual management to first make the effort of actually writing down the value, which is not that easy, and then of course once it's on the wall, share it and the understanding of that value across the organization. So second principle, individuals and interactions doesn't scale, but as we've seen, with the right technologies, it's possible to create an organization that looks more like a network of teams, and that allows us to scale because we manage to reduce the direct dependencies between teams, and we help teams contribute more autonomously to the bigger picture. So that includes, spending a lot of time designing modular and loosely coupled architectures. The example of Amazon is quite telling. There's a huge initial investment, and then our experience is that it's a continuous investment. Like you always have to rethink if you can't invest some changes in your architecture. One important thing, again from the Amazon example, is making sure that the interfaces are really high quality, so that there's like an element of self-discovery and self-service for the other teams. The keywords for that nowadays would be data products and API products. So the idea of bringing product management excellence to technical interfaces. And finally, because this principle is not just for tech teams, one example that we have at Theodo is a self-service data platform where any team can access most of the data from the organization, and therefore access any data that is relevant to their work at that moment. Third principle, right first time and just in time. So as I mentioned, working software is a great principle, but not giving us enough guidance on how to scale production of complex systems. Whereas right first time and just in time, we can leverage, which are the pillars of the Toyota production systems. We can leverage the decades of experience on very large scale production and to produce higher quality and delivering more continuously. So on that, we 3 examples, but one thing we do a lot at Theodo is what we call Jidoka, or you could also call like shift left of quality. How can you bring quality checks as upstream as possible to detect defects early and reduce the cost of quality. One thing we do also we call Dantotsu, which is systematic analysis of defects, to progressively learn where the root causes are and where the patterns are to address the kind of systemic root causes. More on the delivery side, what we use a lot is a tool that we call the real Kanban. I mean, we call it Kanban, but Kanban is a word that is widely used in our digital world, but is, we would say, used a bit too loosely, because it's used for any board that has columns, whereas in the Kanban theory, what you want to see is lead time, you want to see inventory, and you want to see which resources are bottlenecks. So we would say three things. First, you need to display lead time on the elements of work. And the columns need to represent teams and not just steps in the workflow. And it's important to add dedicated columns to the waiting steps to visualize where inventory is piling up, especially in digital, where you can have as many files as you want in a cloud folder. Nobody is going to see them. And finally, responding to change doesn't scale, but what we can do is really try to learn as much as possible, learn from the basically focus on what value the customers want, and to understand how it's changing, and then build on existing learnings to really keep innovating at scale in the organization without starting to have weird crowd behaviors. And of course, once you've build on the existing learnings and build new learnings, make sure that you spread those learnings throughout the organization. So 3 things at Theodo. First, well, because you want this learning organization to be really value focused and customer focused, one tool that it's more than a tool, I would say, one of the systemic thing we do is cultivate a problem solving culture. So really make sure that we're always looking for problems, customer related problems, and always trying to problem solve them. So this allows us to detect the changes in the market much better, and then kind of encourage us to learn and adapt to these. So we use Notion as our platform to write standards, and we use regular Kaizen sessions to keep them fresh. And again, what's interesting with Kaizen is that it kind of structures your self-analysis of how you work from the customer point of view. So again, it's like a very value-aligned way to refresh your standards and create knowledge. And the third thing, so skills matrix in the teams, that is great because it's not only helps the teams visualize, what kind of learnings they need, but it also allows it to really make it continuous on the job, and again pull it from when it's needed. Because to give a very concrete example, you can actually see that in 2 or 3 sprints. If you work in sprints, you're going to be working on a feature that requires GraphQL competence, and then if you realize that only one person in the team has GraphQL competence, you might plan to have 2 or 3 training sessions before that. All right, I hope I wasn't too long. So this was a brief overview of what we kind of learned along our journey the last 10 years, and that we tried to then capture in this book, the Lean Tech Manifesto. And I hope that if you want, that you read the book and that you will enjoy reading it as much as we enjoy leaving the adventure that led us to writing it. Writing was not the most enjoyable experience of my life, but that's another story. That's it. Thank you.
And thank you very much. I pick up quite a lot of interesting points around the scaling, and I think we have a first question. And I invite others to put questions in the chat if you want. And the first question was, and let me get it. I'd be interested to hear what Fabrice has to say when the most devoted Scrum advocates say the solution to these problems you mentioned is just to descale the organization. When does Fabrice see it wise to descale versus adopting more TPS? Not sure TPS and descaling are mutually exclusive. So Fabrice, let us tell us what you think there.
Yeah, I mean, first, I'm not sure I understand what people mean with descaling, because it could mean two things. It could mean, reducing the size of your organization, which is, which can make sense. And there's these amazing examples. So apparently, the software to land the SpaceX rockets was written by only one person. So clearly, the best way to address complexity is to put it all in one person's brain, ideally a genius brain that works 100 hours a week. But if you don't have a genius brain and you're not ready to work 100 hours a week, then of course you start having more people, and with more people comes the friction of synchronizing them. So if descaling means having less people by making them work harder, it's an option. I wouldn't say it's a systemic option. If descaling means addressing complexity, then of course this is the whole point of I would say tech-enabled network of teams, which is really to try to redesign the organization regularly to reduce its complexity by identifying the kind of pockets that you can modularize, and then working hard on how to design good interfaces between these modules. Is it different from adopting TPS? I think TPS or lean thinking is really like this systematic approach of aligning all this with value, and therefore I'm reading some of your words here, Philippe, but I think it's very relevant. And therefore, for example, I'll be a bit blunt here, but you can read the whole of team topologies and all of the good ideas in the book, and not leverage them, and basically use them in a way that is not aligned with value. And then I would think that you have like wasted a lot of efforts, because if the way you design your organization is not aligned with value, then you're probably not solving the right problem. So I think first, TPS brings this very strong culture of saying, okay, where's the value, obsession with value. And second, it does bring systematic solutions, not just tackling complexity at the organizational level, but also quality excellence, and which Philippe suggested we discuss in December. And also the whole learning organization part, because it's good to make the organization less complex, if that's what descaling means, but it doesn't address what you do with newcomers, with team changes, etc. So like a lot of things that are addressed in lean thinking. I don't know if that answers your question, Fortune, which, by the way, I'm very happy to see you today.
And maybe I'll attempt as well a form of answer to this, because I'm also working with those things. And I think what Fabrice is explaining here is that, and it's something we see all the time, is that when we want to descale, or this idea of descaling is effectively an idea of distributing. And when we talk about scaling, we tend to centralize. So to distribute, it means can we create loosely coupled organizations? And that only will work with a loosely coupled software underneath and systems. And therefore, that's not necessarily, that's probably the more modern take, where a lot of the TPS principles still apply around the quality, around the people, around the leadership, around a lot of the ways of working. But TPS is a production system, so there is something that is linear in it. And when we loosely coupled, then it's not as linear, it's interconnected. But it's also important to not lose the north of the interconnection as to add value, as to create value, and as to interconnect around the value, which is more evident when you have a linear process. It's less evident when you interconnect. Am I touching that right, Fabrice?
I mean, I like the way you present it, of course. And I don't know if Fortune wants to
You
give
want to
her,
explain, Fortune? If you want to unmute yourself, it's completely open to do that.
Oh, thank you, Fabrice and Philippe. I'm very grateful for this talk as a longtime advocate of combining Agile and Lean approaches. I find this talk in the Lean Tech Manifesto incredibly helpful because I feel less like I'm out here alone with just 2 or 3 other people to do, to do that. There's just no doubt that when people talk about descaling, they really mean just copy higher, right? Just copy the Ren-Den-Hay model, which can, when poorly used, just mean dropping another framework on people. And I don't think that that's ever effective personally. And also, there's no really coaching in that Ren-Den-Hai model. So you don't have, the kata aspect, which is so crucial to making this work. Thank you.
well, thank you.
Thank you, Fortune. And we have a few other questions, and maybe we can jump into those. One is around, and it was more of a comment, but I'm turning it into a question. How do we get organizations to invest in this sort of loosely coupled architecture? And you talked about capabilities, APIs, data APIs. Those are the things that are gibberish to many executives. How do we convince them of the worth of spending on that? And how do they see the value? Any thought? Or is that the killer question?
No, it's a good question. Well, look, I'm in this lucky position where my combined experience and the release of the book puts me in front of a few executives now that have these questions. It always starts with a problem. And so I think we're in this phase where there's been a lot of investment in digital factories and digital transformation, and that was not enough aligned with value. It wasn't really necessary thanks to the low interest rate environment. Now that it's money is getting more expensive, people are looking at the return on investment, and I think it's a great opportunity to start discussing these things. And I would actually I would say, I mean, maybe I'm biased in the people I talk to, but I find the people I talk to have quite a lot of maturity around that. Like they understand the need to innovate fast. They understand that the current situation is not good enough, and they're looking for solutions. So I mean, that's why we're here today, because we want to bring solutions that actually make sense, are proven, and indeed there's a bit of a battle of ideas, because just to take the safe example, I think it's fascinating. I've seen an organization where there's a product organization doing an amazing job, but not necessarily having like a clear framework, and on the other side, an IT organization using SAFe and delivering less value, but at least in a more structured way. And so the executives being like, oh, you know what? I'd love to have both a very structured approach and the value. And I think this is when we need to say, well, you will need to understand that to create a lot of value fast, you need a way more subtle approaches than just an implementation of SAFe, for example.
And it's probably something that we don't talk enough, or I think people are trying to bring the topic, but it feels always a bit intangible. When we talk about loosely coupled things, organization is the glue. They need the glue to hold them together. And sometimes it's the plan. And when it's the plan, things like SAFe or even waterfall planning and so on actually or hold that coherence. But on the other hand, it's very, very slow to turn around and change. Now, if we are talking about more loosely coupled, and somebody in the chat mentioned higher, which, to those that don't know, is a white good manufacturer from China, which as apparently it's being presented as a very, very decoupled organization and very API-based organization between teams. But I struggle also to find how do we work with fully decoupled organizations, and this alignment to value. How can everybody be aligned to the value, and how can we not have bottlenecks in the decoupling to realize value? It's quite key. So I'm sure that those organizations that appear extremely decoupled in operations are very highly connected in elements of their planning, and especially elements of their strategy and elements of their culture. And the glue is effectively the skills. The strategy becomes the glue of the system to keep operating and delivering value.
There's a lot of questions.
So some questions have appeared.
Should we go quickly through the questions if we want to, fit in the next?
One is about lean software development and how does your approach relate and compares to the work from Mary Poppendieck, which, and I think Mary Poppendieck is a star and has done some brilliant work as well. I'm not sure there is much difference. It's all going in a good sense and good way. But have you been connecting with her work? And
yeah, so I think she was the first one to really bring the word lean in the tech environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so just for that, she needs to be strongly thanked. Yeah, I read the book a long time ago, and my souvenirs is it's very much about the software process, and it's great. And I think ours is a bit more about the tech organization, the tech product organization. So it's slightly, I would say, where Lean Tech Manifesto is slightly bigger picture. And probably also there's a bit more experience because, Mary Poppendieck's book was written 10, 15 years ago, I think. But yeah, it's not in competition. Like, I think we on the principles that are in the book are the same principles that we describe in the Lean Tech Manifesto.
Thank you. And yeah, I second. There is a fantastic talk out there from Mary Poppendieck around how the Empire State Building was built in 18 months in the 1920s, I think. So when you see how long the work takes for your own house sometimes, and you imagine Empire State Building, it's quite a feat. Other questions, and maybe a last one, and we'll wrap for today. For some organizations, safe is the starting point, not the end point. And maybe we shouldn't try and discuss safe too much here, as this is always a heated debate. The glue is respect for people. And then we have a bigger question, building a learning organization. Does Lean have any particular ideas here, e.g. when we talk about standards and skills matrix, this is like maturity models. So trying to control BAU with strict patterns. So reducing options, but innovation is about increasing options, hence responding to change over valuing a plan. How does Lean manage these two competing things?
That's super interesting. I want to give a quick answer to that. So Nick, first, thank you very much for the question. One definition I often give of lean thinking is how to embed a learning system within your production system. So lean is all about learning. First, there's a key thing here, which is that we use the word standard instead of the word process, exactly for the reason that the standard is not something that reduces the option. It's a training material. So you're expecting the team to be trained on the standard, but you're expecting also the team to adapt to the reality and problem solve when things don't happen as the standard describes. And one of that problem solving outcome could be to improve the standard according to what you've learned while trying to adapt. I think that so there's really like, I mean, I'll try to summarize because I mean, thousands of pages of lean thinking, but I think one of the key ideas of lean thinking is you try to detect problems everywhere as upstream as possible, and then you have a systematic problem solving approach. And so this is where the learning comes, and making that happen in a large organization is worth hundreds of pages. But if I had to summarize it, is you try to make sure that everything has a clear OKKO kind of understanding, and as soon as the system is in KO mode, the team stops and does proper problem solving, which is just taking the time to think about possible causes rather than jump to the conclusion. And then, once you've thought about possible causes, choose the countermeasures and try them. And yeah, I mean, I would say any lean thinking book spends so much time talking about learning organization.
And I've also seen the perspective people think about lean like TPS. Sorry, not TPS, Six Sigma. And Six Sigma is actually reducing variability for things that are very, very simple in a sense. And you want to eliminate variability in things that are highly repeatable. And if we think, for instance, a release process, we want that to be right every time and highly repeatable. And maybe aspects of reducing variability are useful here. Software mixes it up with a creative process as well. And I think you'll find when you look at more the TPS style of lean, it's all about learning, as Fabrice says. And some anecdotes on that. The father of Kaizen, Chiro Nakao, explains that it's about scarcity. So, everything is off the table. There's no investment, no more people, no more space, no more tools for people to stimulate their ingenuity to actually find creative answers. So, Kaizen is highly creative in Lean, and it's the place where people also collaborate to create new ideas. So it's not about reducing, it's completely about opening variability and tapping into the human brain, human potential to find that. And any more thoughts on this, Fabrice? I think that's the last question we have, and I've got the wrap.
No, I think your point on Kaizen is good. Is that you can have, a culture where you say this is not a process, this is standard. You can have a culture where you say, okay, when we have a problem, we problem solve, and so we learn. And when you realize that if you want to have a creative culture, then you still need to add Kaizen to that. So dedicated time to taking a step back from BAU. So I would say lean thinking is so much about trying to pull people out of BAU, because I guess that's our default mode, and getting them to think harder, because our brain loves saving energy and not thinking. So, but at the same time, it's a muscle.
The idea of Kaizen is very much to evolve the standard all the time, not to set the standard, but to evolve it and to make it better all the time. So the standard is never something really static.
Yeah, that can be tough when you start
very important
working in a lean organization, that the bar goes higher every time. Yeah, but that's part of the game.
So we're going to wrap for today, and a few announcements. So let me share this. We have the rest of the series where we're going to deep dive and we're going to go further into the thinking around how do we create that alignment to value. So we talked today about why it is important. We're going to discuss approaches how. Then we are going to deep dive into quality and the importance of quality in December, and the leadership in January. So I invite you to register and call out other people to register to those meetups. They are really about exploring, the possibilities that the lean tech thinking brings here. Thank you all for sparing your lunchtime with us.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Fabrice. Thanks, Philippe. Very good talk. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.